Speaker.
Who here thinks that we should all be able to work according to our own ability and receive what we need? Food, healthcare, education. Well, you're not alone. People have actually been trying to achieve this almost since the beginning of time. For example, you might think back to the Pilgrims and the settlement of Plymouth. The town is beset by problems. Starvation, famine, disease, corruption, death prevail. According to the Mises Institute, they explained the system that they had set up. All profits and benefits were to be placed in the common stock of the colony, and all persons of the colony were to get their meat, drink, apparel, and provisions out of the common stock. In other words, a person was to put into the common stock all that he could and take only what he needed. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. This was actually an early form of socialism. According to the Mises Institute, this was also why our forefathers, the Pilgrims, were starving. In case you don't know what socialism is when the government owns the means of production. The Pilgrims were starving because socialism destroys the incentive of people to work hard, provide for themselves, and competitively create the highest quality products at the cheapest price. The reason none of us are starving today, and we can all buy laptops and cell phones for dirt cheap, is because somewhere along the line, our forefathers changed course and built the country on the opposite principles. In 1623, William Bradford, who was the governor of Plymouth, saw his mistake, abolished socialism, and instituted a free market, capitalism, if you will, and that was the end of the famines. Today, I'm making the case that we need to follow the example of the Pilgrims and reject this dangerous philosophy of socialism. I'm going to list some of the countries that have been hurt by socialism, the myth of Scandinavian socialism, and the age-old solution to socialism. I think the story of Plymouth lends itself to this fact, that socialism is an old idea that's responsible for the deaths of millions of people. The proponents always push it as being for fairness and equality, but for people who live under it, it signifies starvation, corruption, and economies rotting from the inside out like rotting fruit on a tree. Witness Greece. The economy there tanked since they adopted free college and free health care. According to the Investor's Business Daily in 2018, the people have made bank runs, hoarded food, medicine, and money, and their economy was bailed out by other countries not once, not twice, but 3 times. Socialism never works. Witness Venezuela. Daniel Lahoud is a professor at Universidad Católica Andrés Bello and Universidad Central de Venezuela. So he lives there and he's an economist. He says, quote, "Before 1973, our government did not own any companies and Venezuela grew 6.5% year on year. In contrast, between 1974 and 1998, we experimented with democratic socialism and GDP growth decreased to 1.9% year on year. Since 1999, we are experimenting with scientific socialism and the rhythm is 0.0% or negative," end quote. Socialism never works. Witness Canada. Healthcare there ranks poorly compared to other nations. Erin E. Carroll, a professor of pediatrics, and Austin Fracht, a health economist, pointed out that only 43% of Canadians were able to see a doctor or nurse on the same or next day. Half of them had to wait 2 or more hours to go to the emergency room. 30% of them had to wait 2 or more months to see a specialist, and 18% of them had to wait 4 or more months for elective surgery. That was according to the Financial Post in Canada, and published 2017. According to the Daily Signal, out-of-pocket expenses for healthcare are nearly identical between Canadians and Americans, but you got to remember that Canadians pay up to 50% more in taxes to support this system. Socialism never works. Now you may be saying, what about these examples of Scandinavian socialism or soft socialism? Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden. Well, with these countries it's a little different, but they're either not socialist or they're less socialist than the United States, or they experimented with socialism somewhere along the line and they're returning back to capitalism with their tails between their legs, or they found oil, or some combination of these factors. According to The Case Against Socialism, written by Rand Paul, corporate taxes in Scandinavia are actually more business-friendly than in the United States. Jess Plunkett with the Orlando Sentinel says that, quote, far from socialist, the Nordic countries are actually closer to true laissez-faire capitalism than the US. But Sweden has free tuition. Wouldn't that be nice here? According to Rand Paul in that last source, Swedish students still wind up with nearly as much debt as their American counterparts, and more Swedes graduate with debt than Americans. How does this happen? Sweden has one of the highest costs of living in the world, end quote. Socialism never works. Now we all know that socialist ideas are taking root here in America at an alarming pace. I think the solution is to do what the Pilgrims did and reject the idea that the government is responsible for our welfare. According to The Case Against Socialism, Chile privatized healthcare and gave up their system of socialized medicine, and their incomes increased by 228%. When they returned to capitalism, they're now 51% richer than their Venezuelan counterparts, who now starve despite the vast resources of their country. To implement this solution, it's going to take a change of mind, a change of vote, and a change of policy spurred on by the grassroots, we the people, you and me. To wrap up, it didn't work for the Pilgrims. It won't work for us. What can we do about it? We can educate ourselves and others. We can go home and tell the truth of what socialism does to different countries through history. And I challenge you to tell your friends and neighbors the truth about socialism in less words than this speech. I want to end with this quote. People call me a socialist sometimes, but you've got to meet real socialists. You'll have a real sense of what a socialist is. I'm talking about lowering the corporate tax rate. My healthcare reform is based on the private marketplace. The stock market is doing pretty good the last time I checked, and it is true that I am concerned about growing inequality in the system, but nobody that questions the efficacy of a market economy in terms of producing wealth and innovation and keeping us competitive, end quote, from President Barack Obama. Thank you.